Hi everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Code Remix Weekly. With you is your regular host, my name is Ludovic, and with me is Sam Stein.
Pleasure to be here, Tim. Good to see you again. As you will no doubt remember, I was out last week, went on a little family vacation, went over to the Olympic Peninsula, where we saw the weather was perfect. We saw just absolutely gorgeous waves and waters, as well as some
Yeah,
really cool local wildlife. I saw two wild sea otters and a pack of
yeah,
five bald eagles circling close overhead. That was the most and best look at bald eagles I have seen ever, I think. And you've also been on some vacations recently, snowboarding and the like. I'm curious, what's the coolest wild animal you have seen recently, or in
coolest.
like the past year, or what have you?
Trying to think, I think in Europe we've mostly like killed our large fauna, so we don't see too much. On the topic of the Olympic Peninsula, that's where I learned that moose are sometimes eaten by orcas when they cross over to the peninsula.
Wow, really?
Yeah.
That's crazy. I didn't know that orcas would occasionally eat moose. I had heard that orcas like typically like pick a food and stick to it. That like if you have an orca that eats, a particular kind of fish, they mostly eat that kind of fish and not other things. So now I'm thinking if there's a gang of moose hunting orcas out there that is like just like watching the like peeking out of the water line, watching the trees, being like, oh, that one's going for it. And moose are, can be huge, like 1,000 pounds or so, or I guess 400 kilograms or something like that, which I could probably feed even an orca for a little while.
Yeah. It does make sense. Like if you're gonna put effort in something, make it be the large, slow-moving animal through the water.
Exactly, exactly. Is that a metaphor for our later conversation about about software engineering at banks and testing?
Uh,
Probably not, but viewers, see if you could find a connection there.
yeah, yeah. So yeah, no. So yeah, good to be back. And as always, we're gonna take you through a couple of things that are new in the past week or so. For that, I'm going to present a screen, and specifically this one. So one thing that we're very pleased with, and me personally very much, is that we are again featured on the ThoughtWorks Tech Radar. So you might recall that we were featured in August, I believe, of 2023. Right now we are moving up. So we moved from the assess ring to the trial ring, indicating that Open Rewrite is something that you probably want to trial in your organization. So very pleased with that. I know in the past I've built my own radar at companies I've worked, identifying cool and new technologies that you might want to be aware of, and it's very neat to see ourselves featured now in the ThoughtWorks Tech Radar. So pleased with that. And then also new is that we did a new release, or we're in the middle of doing a release. If you hear some beeps in the background, that's the release process running on my system. Right now, we're caught up to the Open Rewrite modules and the first couple of the recipe modules. And it is a big release. There's a lot of new nice features in there. But as we've been doing over the past couple of episodes, we want to highlight some community contributions. And this week, that is specifically the support for Gradle Kotlin DSL. So this is now built into the first set of well-known recipes, like the add dependency, change dependency, upgrade dependency version. All of those will now come featured with out-of-the-box support for Gradle KTS files as well. So I think we're closing another issue that has been open for, I don't want to know how long. It is only like close to 2 years. So very pleased to see this resolved. And of course, it could only be done by Shannon, who's
Yeah.
been on the show often. And yeah, I think we last featured him 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, so
So
as we foreshadowed on that episode, the recipes themselves have now been updated. Again, thanks primarily to Shannon. And the same recipe, we haven't split them, so there's still just the one recipe now works on Groovy and Kotlin. And if you, as a recipe developer, are curious how that might work, well, rather than using a Groovy visitor, they use a Java visitor, uh, which the root of the AST type hierarchy is J, the Java type, and both Groovy and Kotlin extend from that. making it kind of a lowest common denominator. And in the handful of places where there is an element, an AST or an LST element, which is specific to Groovy or Kotlin, just do a type check kind of thing. So take a look at those. If you are curious about making a polyglot recipe or want to make your own Groovy Gradle and Groovy Kotlin, Gradle Kotlin supporting recipe, I am so glad to have this, since we ourselves have always done our build scripts in Gradle Kotlin. So now we could finally use Open Rewrite on our own Gradle build scripts. Glorious day.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, best of all, you don't have to make any adjustments as a user. If you just had some KZF files,
Absolutely.
you'll see those changes now reflected there as well. So really pleased with that. Then moving on, we're gonna look ahead a little bit. So almost close to the date, 1 month from now, and 1 month and a couple of days, a week. We're gonna see Merlin featured at the JCon conference in Cologne in Germany. So if you wanna watch a fully new talk, the Spoiled for Choice, Limit Your Options, then be sure to reach out, because we also have some tickets that we can give away. So if you I don't know, comment in the chat or reach out on Slack or whatever way you can reach us, you can ask for those tickets that we can help you get into that conference. I've been there last year and the year before, and it is really recommended. It's a large community gathering, and I really appreciate that. Then looking slightly further ahead, there's going to be another new session, this one on better assertions with Assert J, presented by myself. This will be at Spring I/O in Barcelona at the end of next month. So if you're going to be in the neighborhood or planning to attend, I can really recommend this one, because it's one of my favorites, and I'm very pleased to return there.
I quite enjoyed using Assert J in our testing. If you have any good Assert J tricks, Tim, send them my way. I'd be happy to take my Assert J knowledge to the next level. But I regret I probably won't be able to make it to that session in person.
That's it's okay. We'll maybe do a small one in Miami while you're there.
Hey, that would be fun.
Yeah. So if you have any suggestions on further automations that you would like to see with Assert.J, also reach out, and we can make this part of the presentation and part of course, the recipes that we have to support this type of work. Then moving on, we have our friends at Oracle have released a batch of recipes specific for WebLogic. So if you have some modernization efforts still to do relating to your use of WebLogic, then there's now, I think, close to 100 recipes or over 100 recipes for specific use cases with modernization there.
Oh, you love to see it. I love to see authors of libraries and platforms putting out recipe modules like this. Just takes the user experience to the next level, deals with some of just the common frustrations that we all endure as consumers of libraries. And as someone like selecting a library to use for the first time, or maybe to migrate to, what a competitive advantage, right? Of like, well, if I go with library A and B have similar features, but this one promises they're going to make upgrades easy for me in a really concrete way, I'm obviously going to want to select that one. So I love to see this. I want to see every library and platform maintainer do this.
Absolutely. And of course, they're available on GitHub for their own distribution channel. And we also bundle these into the Rewrite third-party module that we have, where you can get this one plus a number of other ones that we've curated and combined there, just to make your life a little easier to pull these modules in. So then, moving on, there's also been some heroic efforts here on the rewrite templating. Now, this is something that will pay off probably next week when we do the next batch of releases, because the extended support that is making its way into the rewrite templating module that we have will mean that we can pull in, I think, a couple hundred extra rules from the Picnic error-prone support project. So you'll see more of those refaster style recipes make it into the rewrite third party yet again, just because of the improvements mostly made by Francesco here, who's been very helpful in getting these changes merged in. So it's a small glimpse at what's maybe going to be announced next week as the releases roll out. but know that we're very much pleased to see these efforts as well.
Yeah, awesome to see a community contributor making changes in this area. It takes some technical know-how, getting beneath the hood of Open Rewrite, getting beneath the hood of the Java compiler and annotation processors to fiddle with this stuff. So I salute your technical chops and your willingness to contribute this stuff back to the community, Mr. Modesto.
Yeah, absolutely. So very pleased with that. And finally, a quick look ahead at next week, where we will feature Isaac van Doorn, who will give us a bit of a glimpse at the presentation that he'll give at the Code Remix Summit next month. And if you have any questions that you would like to post to him, then you can already send those in. So reach out in the comment section here or on our Slack or whichever channel you prefer. And then we can talk those over next week when we go into the changes on presentation that he'll give, centered on the rock language. So that should be good. So that's it in terms of updates that I had to share for this particular week. And that then, of course, brings us to the main topic of this week, which is, for that, we're going to bring on Laurens.
Welcome to the show, Laurens.
Hi, thanks.
Good to have you. And what brings you to our humble shores this week? What are you looking to talk about?
Well, so previously in my career, I worked for a bank, and a large, big Dutch bank. And engineering culture there is slightly different than what I'm experiencing at Moderne currently. And I thought that might be an interesting topic to talk about. So
yeah, absolutely. And it's a topic that maybe sounds a little bit familiar to me, or I think I might have a perspective on that'll be interested to compare and contrast with yours. As in my own career, I started off at the super large company, Microsoft, and then I went to a still quite large company at Tableau. Microsoft, 100,000 employees. Tableau was like 3,000 by the time I left. Then I went quite small to Gradle, like 65 employees around the time I was there, and then a really, really small at Moderne, which was initially the three of us, but has now started to grow back up towards Gradle levels. So yeah, I too have seen some contrast between just the scale of enterprises, but never quite into the banking or sector. I've always worked on the side of at software companies where the software itself was the product. So I'll be interested to hear what your experiences were like.
Cool. Yep.
So what was the biggest? Was it? Did you have any other like notable stops in your software engineering career? Was it like giant bank straight to Moderne?
Pretty much, yeah. Pretty much from a large bank to Moderne, yeah.
So what was the most jarring part of that transition for you?
The amount of freedom that you get by working for a smaller company. That was really nice. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. And we some of that comes from like, well, there's no like customer data in our products like in our hands or anything. So like no one's given us any secrets that we have to be careful about handling the way that a bank does. Nor are there particularly government regulations that are terribly relevant to running a small SaaS business compared to the level of regulation that is applied to a bank. So yeah, was the flexibility frightening or concerning? Were you used to there being more safety and structure in your everyday work, or was it liberating to finally be able to kind of go where you felt like, or a bit of both?
A bit of both, actually. So the majority of my time at that large bank, I spent in a platform team. So basically, what we tried to achieve was standardization for the teams that consumed our platform.
Right.
And so we did have some struggles with teams, that didn't want to adhere to that standard, that had other ideas.
Yep.
Teams that were very, very willing to adhere and were just very happy that we even had a standard so they could follow it at all.
Totally.
But yeah, as you apply that standard, you get limited in the things you can look at and the things that you can work with. So in that sense, it was nice to get the opportunity to just dive into tons of other stuff. So yeah, at Moderne, when I started at Moderne, I started working on all different kinds of recipes,
Yeah.
and you look at all kinds of different libraries that you maybe would have never looked at if it weren't for having to develop a recipe for it.
Absolutely. Yeah. Since the potential problem space we seek to address is kind of everything, it can be a
Right.
little bit overwhelming of like I could do this or I could do that, or and any individual area you look at is not only broad but incredibly deep. Like you could just focus on just Spring stuff for a long time, or just assert J, or assertions or testing for a long time, and really go in deep. So it can be overwhelming to have all of that
Oh, for sure.
freedom and all of those options. Yeah.
So, I mean, pretty much everyone knows that there's still places where JUnit 4 is still used.
Mm-hmm.
This might be interesting, relaying back to what was mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
But did you know that the predecessor to assert J is called fest?
I did not.
Well, there you go. There is a customer of ours that uses that and that wants a recipe to migrate from fest to assert J.
Ah,
So,
yeah.
And it's only been 10 years that it was renamed, so there's
yeah,
some
for sure.
relative terms.
It's the same as JUnit 4 to 5, but
Yeah, absolutely.
who knew?
So how did you end up on this centralized tooling team at this bank? How did you get involved with trying to set and maintain the standards to support this huge and diverse engineering organization?
Right. So initially I was hired to, like, I guess, kind of guide a team of more senior people
Mm-hmm.
towards microservicing the
Mm-hmm.
application that they were running.
Mm-hmm.
And in that effort, well, at that bank, we used a API first development method. So basically, you define your API spec first,
Mm-hmm.
and then you implement it. And if
Mm-hmm.
you need to make changes, you change the API first, get that
Mm-hmm.
approved, and then change your implementation.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and the thing that kept happening to me, especially in the beginning, was I would introduce an API spec, I would get a review, and it would say, hey, you missed a couple points here and there, and then okay, adjust it, gets approved, merged, onto the next one, and then I would get the same kind of review comments, but they always came from like the same person that was in charge of like making sure that the spec was adhered to.
Mm-hmm.
And so I thought, should probably be an easier way to have people like pick off the easy comments to adhering to the spec, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I pinged that person like, hey, I noticed that you're the only one placing these comments, but did you ever think about automating it somehow? And he said, yeah, there's some kind of linter and some kind of CLI that we can use, and I use it locally on your pull requests, but I haven't really found the time to automate it into a pipeline yet.
Mm.
And so I asked him, hey, I mean, I have time and I'm willing to put in the effort, so let's see what we can do.
Laurens, that is possibly the kindest and most thorough way of saying to someone, I never want to hear your stupid code review comments again.
Well, I mean, I would still get the comments. They would just be on the pull request automatically instead of him having to put them there. So yeah, so through that effort, well, eventually we got that working, and during the pull request there would be a build step that would apply the linter and give you back the comments, and he was very pleased that he didn't have to do those reviews anymore, or at least not the nitpicky stuff. So
I
he really
bet,
did
and I
the
bet that
technical details.
that he didn't have to worry about missing one, right? Because surely
Exactly.
that guy was on vacation sometimes, or
Sure. Yeah.
distracted sometimes.
Exactly. And so through kind of efforts like that were noticed, because initially it was like one person running the show,
Mm-hmm.
and when time came to like create a full-blown team to manage it,
Yeah.
I was asked to join that team, and that's how
Mm-hmm.
I ended up there.
Yeah, that sounds similar to how I first got involved in developer tools. Was on a product team, kept trying to fix problems with the build to help my colleagues, or build and test and all of those things. And so when someone was starting a larger effort to address that, like, well, let's get Sam in there, and that kind of veered my career towards working on developer tooling. So yeah, that sounds
Oh,
really
cool.
relatable to
Nice.
me. I don't want to totally digress into an unrelated topic, but you mentioned earlier that you were initially brought in to microservice their development approach, and it sounds like they were doing some things that make sense with that in terms of like API first development. If you're doing a bunch of microservices, the APIs they communicate with are very important for that working at all. So I guess I'm just kind of curious, what problem were they trying to solve by making things in microservices? Because I feel like when software engineers talk about architecture or microservices, sometimes it's spoken of as like a goal unto itself. And I'm like, well, but like what problem is that actually trying to solve? There's some problems that are solved by that and some that are very much not. So I'm curious, what was the motivation to be microservice-y? Was this following the industry trend, or was there a real need for it?
Initially, it was kind of following the industry trend. So there's this cool thing, microservices, we should do it, separate concerns, blah, blah, blah. And then, well, it was really cool to see along my way as well that, so if you strictly microservice everything, then you'll blow up your network traffic.
Oh, yeah.
So at some point, it's like, okay, maybe we should not completely microservice everything, but work with aggregates here and there to, you know, have data that's closely related, just, you know, be duplicated and be okay with it, because it doesn't make sense to blow up the network about it. And so, yeah, we gradually shifted from, you know, here's the trend, we should follow it, to like a more practical approach. Yeah, that.
Fair enough. Do you have a sense of if the initial goals were like let teams ship code independently? Like sometimes it's trying to solve like an organizational or a process problem of like the communication, like you mentioned like network communication. Sometimes like a microservice, like it's kind of a truism in software engineering that you ship your org chart. And sometimes if you have a large organization with many teams, just like effective communication between those teams can be really hard because there's so many that need to talk with each other. And sometimes organizations could reach for a microservice architecture to be like, okay, let's reduce the number of teams you have to talk to ship something so that you can actually ship something.
Right. Well, eventually we did get to the problem. So, you know, we had some microservices running, and, you know, some people started consuming them because they needed that data. And then at some point we wanted to migrate to a different API management tool, or even an API management tool at all. And so then the question came, who are the consumers of my service, right? Because that's the teams you need to talk to at that point.
Right.
And so, yeah, well, at that point, it was just like, how are we going to identify these people? That's why we needed an API gateway tool.
Right.
And so, yeah, eventually we implemented that API gateway tool, and we did have a nice list of who are my consumers and what are they doing with my API. And that did make the release process easier, because you could like pinpoint who was using which endpoint, and yeah, exactly. You could check who was going to be affected by your changes, and effectively communicate with them like, hey, we're going to release on, let's say, Tuesday. So make sure you get your changes in before Tuesday. And if not, well, we may break something for you. So
was that acceptable in the culture of the bank at the time, to just break something for your consumers?
Not in production, no.
Okay.
So initially, when I started at the bank, we had this release process where like once every 2 weeks, everyone would put everything in that they wanted to release, and there would be one big release, everybody present in the office, you know, making sure everything works well, potentially reverting everything if one thing didn't work, because, you know,
right,
how can we pinpoint in a short time where the issue is?
Totally.
And eventually we did move more towards a like an approach where, you know, you can ship stuff daily, but please make sure you don't break stuff.
So now that please make sure you don't break stuff is that's doing a lot of heavy lifting when you have
sure.
You know, roughly how many employees are we talking at this bank? Is this like a 5,000, 10,000, like 20,000, like where are
it
we
was
at
around
roughly?
3,000.
Okay, yeah, so substantial. You don't know everyone personally at that
exactly.
point. Yeah, by a long shot.
True. Yeah, so yeah, we did still have people to coordinate releases. So they would make sure that people talk to each other, make sure that stuff doesn't break, make sure stuff gets tested in a pre-release environment. So usually, if something breaks in production, that would be very, very occasional thing to happen, or not occasional, but it wouldn't happen very often. Let's say.
Right. So this process sounds like it was reasonably good at preventing disruption in production. What were kind of the effects on delivery velocity, right? Like, what did this make it slow for change to happen? Like, if you actually have like a breaking change, it's going to affect a bunch of consumers. It's going to affect a bunch of their consumers. Like, does that just take a year, or was there a way to like make this happen?
Right. So, well, that was a struggle for a while, and I think we defined what teams could do to manage it, and what we ended up settling on is, well, you may just have to be backwards compatible, or like if you make a breaking change, introduce it in a new endpoint, and slowly deprecate the old endpoint. And what we eventually did was we recommended teams to take a 6-month period to just make sure that every consumer had the right amount of time to update their stuff and started consuming the newest endpoint.
And did that work? Was that something that had to be done like on the regular? Because change kind of never stops happening so long as there's still people who need things and want things from the software. So was there like always a rolling like 6 months, like we're in the 6 months like change cycle in
Yeah,
perpetuity?
usually there was. Yeah. There was always something going on. It was always like new insights, we need to massively change this endpoint. Okay, here we go again. We need to maintain it for a while. So yeah, that happened regularly. Yep.
And of course,
so
while
go ahead.
While handling such concerns, did the platform team also you said kind of the standards for the company? So as you have your own initiatives functionally for what the bank should do, imagine you're also getting clobbered by new Spring releases, Java releases, the kind of things that you also
for sure.
Those studies.
Yep. Yeah. So initially we managed those by hand, and we tried to keep up with them like once every 6 months, I guess. And eventually what we started doing is I had a colleague, I mean, at the time it was somehow a mutual colleague of ours, Tim. And he introduced through Tim, I guess, Open Rewrite at the bank. And so we started using that, and that really helped us get on top of, being able to easily automate that, not only having our own platform up to date, but also distributing that quickly to our consumers. So yeah. But yeah, we did have to manage all those things as well.
So did that start a culture, a practice of creating open rewrite recipes for internal APIs as well? So it strikes me, if you have all these microservices, you could make recipes to help your consumers adapt to your changes.
Yeah, we did. Yeah, we did write a couple of custom recipes for internal stuff that we backwards incompatibly broke. And then we helped them, automatically migrate to reduce their pain, so to say.
That's great. So yeah, you mentioned how did your your testing strategy play into this? You mentioned that you had an interest in testing and testing tools. How did that work?
So, well, during my time at the platform team, we noticed that these release cycles always were paired with someone from the business having to do manual testing to make sure that stuff worked. And then sometimes during those manual tests, things were caught at runtime that, could have been solved by somebody having for example, a collection of Postman calls that they just fired at their application right before the release.
Right.
So we always thought about how can we help teams automate their testing, so that they can have confidence in, saying, hey, if we release this software now, it should, for the most part, work as intended. And so through that notice of pain for those teams, we were really keen on adding testing utilities to our platform wherever we introduced a new module to help make testing of semi-complex things super trivial. So one of the things that we had going at the bank is, you have an authentication mechanism based on OAuth, semi-custom flow, but doesn't really matter. And so you could have a token that was related to a customer, but also a token related to an employee, and they would at some point be able to view overlapping data, but that customer could also view other data, and or the employee could see other data. The customer shouldn't be able to see that data. And so we added this testing module where we built support for being able to generate an actual token that was actually signed. And then through Spring Boot integration testing, we could use that actual token and see what, for example, a response would be like when you fired it at your service.
Right. So I see that obviously it's good to provide test utilities to make testing complex things possible, but that's only the first step, right? Once you have the utilities available, they actually need to be used by the relevant people. So how do you affect the change in process or in culture so that people would actually use these utilities and increase your success rate at releasing things without regression or late breaking manual testing?
Right. So what we always did is when we added those testing utilities, we would make sure that it was extensive documentation, and as well as in our platform project, we had a module which was kind of like a reference implementation where we also applied the testing utilities ourselves.
Right.
So there would always be a concrete example of what can this testing utility do
Right.
in the basics. How do you apply it? What, and stuff like that.
So were you able to? That's great. I find it so useful to have an example of code used in its appropriate context, right? Like documentation is great, but one thing I'll often use Moderne for is for doing source code search across many repositories to find examples of the usage of a particular piece of code, so that I can see it used in its real context. Because even the best documentation for pacing, for clarity of focus, will omit little details of like, how do you set the thing up beforehand, right? Or like, what did you change about your build files or your imports, or some pattern, implicitly being assumed by the author of the document. And so you can answer all of those questions yourself if you have a real example to the pointer of the code. So I love hearing that you had examples like that. Now, did you have a way to measure adoption? Like, you go put out this great documentation, you go put out these examples. Did you know for a fact that anyone actually started using them? Because like, you can't do the API Explorer trick necessarily like you did with your actual production services to measure usage.
Sure. So what we started doing a while before I left was we would offer teams to do a technical review of one of their services, and we would sit together with them for an hour, maybe an hour and a half, go through one of their services, and me and a colleague or some other colleagues would look at that service beforehand, look at what was being used, look at the testing suite as well, and so we would run through things that we commonly saw that could be improved or could be better tested. And so basically we would use that hour and a half to guide them through hey, here's what we offer you, here's what you're using, here's how things could be better. And I think most of the teams really appreciated that effort. They got the dedicated time with us. And well, we could really show them hey, if you do it this way, then you can actually have an actual representative test of what a customer would see in production. And it would be a really eye-opening experience for most of those teams.
Right.
And through that, we could help drive the adoption. So initially, we would see that there were teams that were on top of what we did, and they adopted right away when we added stuff. We also had teams that said, I mean, if we need to upgrade our platform, our version of your platform, we do that only once a year because all of the rest of the time goes to adding benefits for the customer.
Right, right.
So yeah, we really tried that personal touch to get them to adopt things that we were offering to them,
That makes sense.
and it worked.
But you never. I don't know. Did you reach 100% of teams in the company that way? Like what fraction of the teams in the company did you reach through personal direct outreach?
So I feel like we reached 100% of the teams, but not
Really?
all of the yeah
Not
not all.
directly necessarily.
Well, not all of them took the opportunity that we offered them.
Mm,
And at that point, I mean, we couldn't beat them with a stick and say, "Hey, you need to sit down with us and improve stuff." But
right, right.
Yeah.
we
So
gave it our best effort, and most
so what
teams
was your what
appreciate
was
it.
your what was your success rate in terms of like how many teams took you like what fraction of all teams took you up on that offer?
I would say about 80%.
Oh,
So
that's pretty
actually,
good.
quite a few. Yeah.
Uh,
At the point that I left the company, we had around 40 teams consuming our platform.
40
And
teams out of roughly how many teams total?
uh, well, well, pretty much all the software at the bank was through our platform. So
Uh-huh.
40 out of 40 teams.
Okay, all right. That's pretty
and
good. That's
and
pretty good.
about 80% of them actually accepted the offer to look at their code and go through
Mm-hmm.
stuff. So
Mm-hmm.
oh,
So is that a process that you recommend to centralized tooling teams or teams providing providing tools to internal customers of like, hey, go set up regular meetings with them, or if not regular meetings, then like whenever you have a big release, like
right.
build salesmanship
Mm.
essentially into your own product lifecycle.
I think so. I think I could very much recommend it. I think the having that more personal connection and less of a like a distant approach where you're that all saying authority of here's our platform and you shall use it, and
Uh-huh.
um, I think that shies some people away that you can really reel back in with that personal touch.
Yeah.
And I think we really realized that it was working and we kept doing it. So
Yeah. Okay. All right. Right on. So, what lessons have you taken from that to apply in at Moderne? You know, outside of the big bank, you've seen the value of this personal touch and advancing the and making sure that you're not just coding something, but you're coding something that people will actually use and benefit from.
right. So uh, well, as a technical account manager at Moderne, I really take that to heart. So when
Yeah,
I'm working with a
you are the
customer,
personal touch. Yeah.
right, I am the personal touch. So when I'm working with a customer to get an issue resolved, I think it's really good to keep them up to date on where you are in the process, whether you need
Absolutely.
more information or whether you've got something already released and they can start using it already.
Mhm.
Um, so yeah, I think that that personal touch is also something that our customers appreciate.
For sure.
Um, so yeah, yeah.
Yeah, right on. So what advice do you have for someone who's maybe going the other direction, right? You've now seen working at the big bank and at the small company. If someone is going into like the big bank or the large enterprise environment for the first time in their careers, like what advice do you have for them to like help them be successful and thrive in that kind of environment?
That's a really good question.
Thanks.
I don't think I've ever given that any thought actually. So uh, I guess just don't get frustrated with how um, like I guess how slow things can happen there,
Sure.
and be persistent in trying to make change happen if you think it's the right thing to do.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, it's a big ship and it has inertia, so it's going to keep going in the direction it's going. But
right,
over time, you can change the trajectory.
exactly. So yeah, you really need to be persistent and have patience, and
Mhm.
make sure that you reach the right people and keep fighting for the cause.
Reaching the right people and fighting for the cause. Yeah, absolutely. I've sometimes observed software engineers get into the industry because they like working with machines more than they like working with people.
Hmm.
And I could get that. Coding is fun. We all enjoy coding, but I've also observed that that places kind of a low ceiling on your career, because if you can't persuade, whatever your role is within the company, whether you have a position of ostensible authority or not, if you can't persuade people of the value of your ideas, then you can never accomplish anything larger than a one-person job.
Right.
So what do you what advice do you have about establishing those relationships, about finding the people? Like, you want to be persistent, you want to make positive change, you're new to this organization, you don't necessarily know who the movers and shakers are. Like, how do you get in the position where you're able to persistently drive towards that positive change?
I would say start small. So, if you're already working in a team, try to get them on board.
Yeah.
Obviously, you'll have some touch with other teams, especially like in a microservice landscape. You will be consuming or like having your service consumed by others.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
and if at some point, you could maybe have a look at their code. I mean, most companies nowadays are inner source, so you can take a look at their code,
Right.
see if you can help them with, improving stuff there. Um,
Hmm.
no,
Some people, if
Yeah.
you reach over to their code, are like, "Stop that! This is my little fiefdom. This
hmm
is my thing. You were criticizing me implicitly by playing with my
right,
toys."
exactly.
Yeah.
And so we, we did have a team at the bank as well that was like that, where if you put a small comment on their PR, just nothing serious, just something like, hey,
They'd
you
be
could
like,
improve
"Screw
this.
you."
They'd be like, hey, why are you looking at my PR? Don't judge me. This is how we do it.
Yeah.
And I think that's the moment where you just need to say like, hey, let's give it a call or have a cup of coffee, or
Hmm.
the latter was harder sometimes during COVID, but nowadays
Sure.
we can do that again. So
Yeah.
discuss it over coffee, even if it's something small. Just uh, make clear what your intentions are, that you're not trying to harm them, that you're just trying to
Hmm.
help them, improve their software.
Hmm.
Um, and I think that once again, that personal touch is really what helps there.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Once people don't, someone who's reacting that way is probably doing so based upon past experiences they've had of people
Sure.
do it, like drive-bys on their work, shitting on it or maligning it, or at least that's how they felt about the experience afterwards.
Right.
And so if you don't recoil from that first sting of rebuke, maybe like, well, not this isn't an attack. Not I'm trying
Right.
to help. We're and I find it could be really useful to be humble about it, right?
Right.
Because
Right.
bullies are never particularly humble about their bullying. So, like, if you
True.
if someone is like prickles at your suggestion, and then you can demonstrate some humility in your follow up to that, they're like, oh well, okay, I don't really know what this guy's about, but it isn't. They're not attacking me. They're not a
Right.
bully if they're behaving
Exactly.
like this.
Right. Yeah. Makes sense.
Yeah, you want to start with like small improvements, clear improvements, something that won't give any discussion, and then
Hmm.
slowly make your way up with impact you could be having in an org. That's
Yeah.
it.
That would
Yeah,
be ideal. Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah, something that is so simple and unambiguously helpful that no one could object to it. And then once people have seen that you've made many helpful changes like that, well, if you have something more controversial or more sweeping, you'll get more grace from the people who've been like, well, I saw the last 10 times it was helping. This one I don't understand as much, or I have some concerns about. But there's a clearly established pattern of helping, so this probably helps too. And I
Mm-hmm.
now want to figure out why, right? I want
Right.
to engage with this rather than just like trying to deflect it.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, cool. So, what I know testing is a subject you're passionate about. How did like testing play into, like, what kind of like strategies did you use, and did you advocate the rest of the organization use? And really crucially, I think, what sort of pushback did you get when advocating for or against a particular development practice?
Right. So, um, what we saw at the bank was that a lot of teams were struggling to build meaningful integration tests. Um,
Mm,
and
mm-hmm,
what I mean by that is that they were pretty much just mocking everything, making sure that it was right for their use case, then running the use case and obviously getting the right result.
mm-hmm,
Um, so what we really try to show them is that, hey, you can write meaningful tests with actual context. Like, for example, at some point we added a module where you could spin up an actual database, and instead of having your H2 database and just pre-filling it with everything you need, we did something similar for Kafka, where we added the option to have an in-memory queue and actually interact within queue instead of
simulating or mocking it.
Simulating or mocking it, indeed. And so we really try to push teams to identify those crucial flows in their code that would either get hit very often, or that had complex inner workings that you really needed to make sure that the outcome was going to be the right outcome. And so kind of direct them towards a pyramid of the testing pyramid, where most of your tests should probably be integration tests. There should be some unit tests, and then maybe there should be some system integration tests where you're actually calling another team service on the testing environment and having that return some kind of data.
Right. I've definitely seen it in the past that the testing is not an unalloyed good, right? It always comes with costs. I've seen it before that at a large or medium-sized organization that they have that there was a very large suite of tests that were more like the end-to-end or the systems integration tests than they were like an integration test, and that led to them being very flaky, right? Failing in response to stimuli or changes that were harmless, requiring a lot of time and expense to run. Eventually, getting to a point where it, like, on a good day, the pass rate was not 100%. So it was like, well, okay, if we're like comparing how this branch is doing versus that branch, it's like, well, this one 80% of the test passed, and this one, 50% of the test passed, and like trying to make comparisons like that. And I was like, well, this is pathological. Part of like this is too much testing that's too expensive and too unreliable. You should probably start by throwing a lot of this away. Did the testing practices what kind of costs did they impose upon the bank, and what kind of problems did you have as a result of that testing strategy?
So, well, maybe a side thing to mention here first is that we also did have a team that was very into testing, that much that they ran like load testing as well and mutation tested their load test. So at some point they were running a load test every 15 minutes. That would take almost 15 minutes. So it would pretty much run all the time. And they saw nothing wrong with it. I mean, occasionally it pointed out that things were breaking under high load. But then at some point after like a month or 6, we asked them like, hey, what value have you gotten from this load test? As the I guess the team that managed like the build platform, they came to us saying like, hey, there's this build that's running almost permanently, and it's hogging a lot of capacity.
Right.
And so we looked into it and we said like, hey, what value have you gotten out of this in the past 6 months? And they said, yeah, at some point we noticed that this one thing broke because we changed something, and we fixed it. We're like,
yep.
Okay, but do you actually need to run this load test every 15 minutes for that to show up on your radar? And so we decided on, okay, let's maybe just run it once every day, and then maybe if you really want to get greedy, like once after you push like something to your branch. They were like, okay, maybe we can get away with that, and then we reduced that cost majorly there.
Yeah.
Most of the other teams actually we really had to get them aboard on even having meaningful test suites. So they had unit tests and mocking tests.
Right.
And so their test suites ran within like a minute or two, and they didn't really say anything meaningful about their code changes. So we really had to get them on board on writing actual integration tests, and I guess the cost of running those tests became higher. But then again, if you look at, I guess, giving away a little bit about which bank exactly it was, this bank operated under 4 separate identities, and each of those identities had their own business, and each of those business units had to have some manual acceptance crew that ran through a manual test.
Okay.
So if you look at reducing the need for those people, I guess we actually improved what the cost of those tests was. So I would say
even the more expensive automation was valuable because it let you cut down on a lot of manual testing. You're saying?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. And then of course eventually we got to integrating your stuff into production more often, because you didn't need to wait for the time slot to have that person test your product. So that also helped in speeding up the release flow.
Yeah, absolutely.
If you don't have to fourfold test the changes that you're doing manually, then you can actually
Exactly.
start to make an impact at scale. Yeah.
For sure, yeah.
Yeah, so you talked a couple times about kind of the right size or scope for a test being an integration test more so than a unit test or an end-to-end or systems acceptance test. The definitions of words are always a bit malleable. What's like the hallmark of a good integration test? Like what do you like? What are some of the attributes of that right size test?
That's a good question. So I think you should always, if you're testing something, and you should always have in mind what the goal of the test is. So what are you trying to achieve? And I think that should always be the starting point of what the test is going to entail. So if you're looking at a microservice landscape, it's probably you're going to make a request with a certain input, have it do some stuff, expect a certain output, maybe expect that it has an entry in the database. So yeah, I think the scope is pretty much defined by that idea of what is the flow that we go through and what is the input and the output.
Yeah, that's okay. Yeah, that's interesting. I sometimes think about testing in terms of what kind of changes should be allowable, right? Because one way the test can impose cost on an organization is by failing for things that aren't harmful, right? If my test, like one anti-pattern that I think everyone should avoid in any test they create is looking for a specific natural language string or sequence of words in the output of anything, right? Because like wording can change, and it's not a failure of the software if someone goes in and improves the phrasing of a sentence meant to be communicated to an end user. And so that would fall into what I'd say is a false negative test failure. Would then result from that. So yeah, that's one thing I always look for, thinking about making a test that disallows harmful change, right? Because what we're trying to do is make invalid system states, unrepresentable or impossible to or just more difficult to get through. So I sometimes said that, or I've seen the observation made before that like the goal of product code is to get ever more specific about doing exactly what it needs to do, and the goal of test code is to get ever more generalized, so that all of the possibly allowable things that the product code could do are allowed by the tests, and anything that is specifically wrong is disallowed. Yeah, I don't know if I have a question in there. Just musing.
Well, to continue on that, I think often when we make changes to our code and the tests break, some people see that as, oh no, I broke something. Like, maybe I should go back and see if I can, make an exception case for this. But sometimes it's valid to have to change your test because you change the logic of your application, right?
Sure.
So sometimes it's not a bad thing to change the expected outcome of your test according to the change you made to your logic. Not saying that that testing certain phrasing of a sentence in your output, that's not part of that, of course. So maybe you should test for certain keywords in that phrasing that should be present instead of testing for the exact phrase. But yeah, I think there's nuances to being able to change the outcome of the test based on the logic that changed.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and it's just one way that even like a well-written, useful test can not be zero cost, right? Because you could have a test that successfully guards you against many regressions, and then one day does end up failing because of a legitimate change and needs to be adapted. And that's just the nature of it, and the nature of evaluating the kind of trade-offs you're making in terms of like adding more. Like every test you add comes with costs in terms of execution time, in terms of time spent investigating failures. And you just need to make sure, or you're always trying to have it be like, well, this is going to save me more in problems prevented than it's going to cost me in maintenance, upkeep, execution of this test.
So that's what I meant by determining the meaning of the test. So how meaningful is the test?
Yes.
Obviously, you can test literally everything you want to test, but as you said, at what cost? And that's why the majority of your tests should probably be integration tests and not system integration tests, because system integration tests are
too
expensive,
large, costly, and flaky.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then unit tests are most often maybe
too narrow,
have too little meaning to actually determine whether your application works successfully. So
I think that's particularly a problem in unit tests that extensively mock
exactly
that mock their dependencies.
I set my expectation, and then I test that I set my expectation correctly.
Yeah, exactly.
Getting 100% coverage on just a web controller,
like
the input and the mocked output. Yeah.
That's also interesting because oftentimes companies they have a metric for test coverage, and sometimes it's difficult to relay integration testing to the actual coverage of your testing, and that's certainly something we ran into at the bank, where we had this metric like, hey, you need to touch at least 80% of your test coverage, which meant that unfortunately sometimes we did have to add those tests that I set my expectation and then I test that I set it correctly, and then hey, coverage.
Yeah,
cool.
That's wasted effort. It's definitely an example of when a measure becomes a target, it ceases to be a useful measure. People code to the target. Well, it's been a good conversation, Laurens. Any final thoughts before we end here for the week?
I guess get your testing up to speed, so you can be especially happy about pushing your code to production.
Yeah,
increase that confidence, especially
absolutely.
As I've seen with the adoption of Open Rewrite at the bank. Increasing your test coverage, meaningful test coverage, really helps in driving the adoption of automated pull requests on your code. So it would be good to give some focus to that if you can.
Absolutely. And I will point out, to bring this back to Moderne and Open Rewrite a little bit, is that having some amount of testing makes it much easier to accept automated changes, right? Like if you're running a recipe to update you to the latest version of some platform or library, usually the goal of most recipes is to improve something about the code while making no changes whatsoever to the functionality of the code. And so having even a little bit of testing helps a lot with a little bit of automated testing helps a lot with making it easy to accept changes suggested by automation.
For sure. Yep. 100%.
Well, any final remarks, Tim?
No, not really. No, it's I want to thank Laurens for joining us for today.
Absolutely.
Of course, we're very much looking forward to next week when we'll have Isaac van Doorn on as indicated. And with that, I want to really thank you all for joining, and hopefully see you next week.
Yeah, hopefully see you next week, and hopefully see you at the Code Remix Summit in Miami very soon. So,
Absolutely.
Thanks so much, everyone, and have a great week.
Thanks all. Cheers.
Cheers.
Join us in Miami for Code Remix Summit. Attend hands-on sessions with some of the best industry experts. Looking for immediate ROI by attending? Bring a relevant business case and work directly on solutions affecting your organization in the hack track. Bring your problem, bring your laptop, and walk away with work done for your boss. Register today for Code Remix Summit.